I first noticed him on a Tuesday. It started with a smell. Not something obvious like rotting food or mildew. This was different. Faint, but distinct. The scent of damp earth and something metallic, like rust or old blood. It lingered in the hallway, in the corners of rooms, as if the walls themselves were exhaling decay. The air felt stagnant, like a room that had been closed for too long, suffocating under the weight of something unseen. I told myself it was just the old house settling, its history bleeding through the cracks. But then I saw him. It was late, somewhere past midnight. The world outside was silent, the wind pressing against the windows in soft, irregular patterns. A single lamp illuminated the living room, casting flickering shadows that seemed to stretch and move on their own. I was in the kitchen, cradling a mug of lukewarm tea, my fingers tight around the ceramic. The air conditioning hummed faintly, but underneath it I heard something else. A whisper, soft, indistinct. The kind of sound that makes your skin tighten and your stomach churn. My breath hitched. I turned my head slightly, trying to locate the source, and that's when I saw it, a flicker in the corner of my eye. A shadow, just at the edge of my vision, unmoving yet present. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. The logical part of my brain screamed that it was just exhaustion, just a trick of the dim light. But then the flicker became a shape, and the shape became a man. A stranger. Standing in my hallway. I froze. The mug in my hands trembled, hot liquid sloshing over the rim. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The man was tall, gaunt, his presence foreign and unnatural, like he didn't belong in the space he occupied. His face was a smear in the darkness, details blurred, as if reality itself refused to acknowledge him. And then I blinked, and he was gone. A chill crawled up my spine, a slow, creeping sensation that left my skin prickling. The room felt colder. My breath came in uneven bursts as I turned on every light, searching every inch of the house. I checked the locks twice, then 3 times. I went to bed that night telling myself there was no one in my house. I was wrong. The first real sign came the next morning. I woke up to find the chair in the kitchen moved. Not dramatically, just a few inches, but enough that I noticed. The air smelled off again, that same damp metallic scent clinging to the walls. My stomach twisted. I tried to recall if I had shifted it myself, but I knew I hadn't. A sense of unease settled over me, but I shoved it down. I pushed the chair back in place and went about my day. That night, the chair moved again. This time, it was turned completely around. I stood in the doorway, staring at it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. A slow, creeping realization settled in my bones. Someone, or something, was in this house with me. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, barely audible. A low murmur just at the edge of my hearing, like distant voices pressed against the walls. I strained to listen, but the moment I tried to focus, the sound disappeared. I searched every room, every corner, but I was alone. Except I wasn't. Days passed. The disturbances grew worse. My keys would vanish from the counter only to appear in the freezer. My television would flicker on in the middle of the night, static hissing through the speakers. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and deliberate. My bedroom door, which I always closed, would be open when I woke up. The air itself felt heavier, pressing down on me like an unseen force. And the worst part? I started seeing him more often. At first it was just glimpses. A figure standing in the reflection of my bathroom mirror when I turned away. A silhouette behind the curtains, motionless. Then one night I woke up to the feeling of breath on my face. I bolted upright. The room was dark, still, but the air was suffocating, thick with something unseen. The scent of damp earth was overwhelming, and in the faint glow of my alarm clock, I saw him, standing at the foot of my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. He leaned closer and whispered my name. I left the house the next morning. I checked into a motel across town, desperate to escape. But the moment I opened the motel room door that night, I knew I had failed. The air was heavy. The curtains swayed, though the windows were shut. And there, in the mirror above the dresser, he stood, watching me, smiling. That was when I understood the truth. He hadn't been haunting the house. He had been haunting me. And no matter where I went, he would follow. The only way to end this was to face him. I returned to the house, heart pounding. The night was silent. The sky stretched in an endless black expanse, devoid of stars. The porch light flickered as I stepped inside. The house seemed to breathe around me, the air so thick and heavy it pressed against my chest. The scent of decay clung to the walls, stronger than ever. I turned toward the hallway, and there he was. This time, he didn't disappear. He took a step forward, and another, until he was close enough that I could see his face. It was mine, twisted, hollow, as if life had been drained from it. My own reflection standing before me, smiling that same awful smile. And then I remembered. The accident, the crash, the darkness that had swallowed me whole months ago. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was a stranger in the house. The real owner had just moved in. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My vision blurred and the house around me seemed to dissolve. A crushing darkness swallowed me whole, and when I opened my eyes, I was somewhere else. A world just like mine, yet twisted. The house was still there, but different, distorted. Shadows stretched too far. The walls pulsed like something alive. I could see him, my reflection, living my life, walking through my house, smiling at my friends. I pounded against an unseen barrier, screaming, trying to break through. But he didn't notice. I was trapped. Then I turned around. The world behind me was infinite. A mirror of my own, but darker, colder. Streets that led to nowhere, buildings that twisted at impossible angles. Figures emerged from the shadows. They had my face. All of them. Hundreds of versions of me, each warped in their own horrifying way, some gaunt and hollow-eyed, others grinning with mouths stretched too wide. And they were all whispering my name. A hand gripped my shoulder. Cold. Familiar. I turned. The real me stood there staring, his eyes black pits of nothingness. "You never belonged," he whispered. And then, he pushed me into the abyss. They say a house remembers, that its walls absorb the laughter, the sorrow, the horror. If that's true, then the Holloway house never forgot what happened within its walls, and neither have I. The year was 1986. I was 13 when my family moved into the old Holloway house, a sagging Victorian relic at the edge of town. People whispered about it, said it was cursed. But my father, a man of reason, dismissed it as small-town nonsense. Just a house, he said. Brick and wood. Nothing more. He was wrong. From the first night, I felt something watching me. Not just the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling, I mean eyes. Cold, unseen, always there. I tried to shake it off, but then came the whispers. Soft. Raspy. Right outside my bedroom door. I told my parents. They laughed it off. Said I was adjusting. Said it was my imagination. But then the dreams started. They weren't dreams, not really. More like glimpses into something old. Something waiting. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest, convinced that someone, something, had been standing at the foot of my bed. Then I found a doll. It was up in the attic, tucked inside an old wooden chest. A porcelain baby doll, its face cracked, one glassy eye missing. It wore a tattered blue dress, its tiny hands frozen mid-reach, like it had been left waiting for someone to pick it up again. I don't know why I brought it downstairs. Something about it felt lonely, abandoned. I placed it on my dresser, thinking nothing of it. That night, I woke to the sound of soft giggles. A child's laughter. My room was empty. The doll, however, was no longer on my dresser. It was in my bed, right beside me. I threw it back in the attic, locked the chest, swore I wouldn't touch it again. The next morning it was back, sitting on my pillow, its one-eyed stare boring into me. I screamed. My parents rushed in, furious that I was playing pranks. My father grabbed the doll, marched outside, and threw it into the garbage bin. I watched him slam the lid shut. That night, I barely slept. Every creak made my pulse race, but when morning came, I felt relief. Until I turned over in bed. The doll was lying next to me again. I bolted upright, my skin crawling. My father, convinced I was sneaking out to retrieve it, stormed out to burn it himself. He doused it in lighter fluid, lit a match, flames swallowed the porcelain, curling the dress into ash. But then something unnatural happened. A high-pitched scream, not my father's, not mine, echoed through the yard. The flames burned blue, twisting, writhing, like something inside the doll was fighting to escape. The moment it shattered into smoldering fragments, the screaming stopped. For a week, things were normal. No whispers, no laughter. I almost convinced myself it was over. Then one night, I woke up unable to move, the girl in the dark. Sleep paralysis, they call it. But this wasn't just some medical phenomenon. My room was bathed in shadows, and at the foot of my bed stood a girl. She was no older than 6. Her face was pale, sunken, her hair long and matted. Her eyes, black, hollow voids, bored into me. She tilted her head, her lips parting as she whispered in that same raspy voice from the hallway. "You shouldn't have burned me." I tried to scream, but my throat locked. The air around me thickened, pressing down on my chest. Then I felt something cold brush my hand. Tiny fingers, the touch of a porcelain doll. I blacked out. The next morning, my parents found me on the attic floor, curled up beside the wooden chest. The doll was gone. The house silent. We moved out a month later. My father never spoke about what happened. My mother refused to even look at me when I brought it up. But I know what I saw, what I felt. And sometimes at night, I still hear the laughter. Closer. Waiting because some things never leave.